So the first thing you need to do is to get your clay through the pasta machine until you get a perfect mica sheen, after which you will do a crisscross pattern with a threaded rod, and these are very easy and very cheap to find at any home improvement store, and they come in various thread sizes and length sizes. So the next thing is to shave to obtain a nice mica shift. And you would ask, why did I choose this specific pattern? Because it looks a little bit like fabric, in my mind at least. So I thought it would look like if you want an embroidered heart of sorts. That was my vision. Oh well. Once you're happy, get your sheet perfectly smooth, and then place it on whatever you're going to bake it on. In my case, I use these 3-inch mirrors, and use your heart cutter. And then all you have to do after that is to bake it, sand it, and buff it. Now let's do the back of it. But see how pretty the pattern is? To do the back of it, I'm going to roll the remaining of the clay mix of gold and alizarin crimson I had, and I'm going to make a long sausage, almost a string but not really a string. And once I get it, I will cut off the very ends of it so I can make a small heart out of it, out of those ends, I mean. And then I will use that small heart to keep placing that string all around it. And it's easy, you just make a teardrop shape, and then you do, using any kind of tool, you do a dip in the top of the teardrop. So now I'm going to simply start arranging those strings concentrically around that heart. Get it to be almost as big as your heart cutter, and I'm going to place a small triangle right there on top so I don't have any empty space when I'm trying to cut. After which I'm flattening just a little bit, and then I will cut it in half, the thickness of it, and then I will be using that to obtain a pretty backing. Yeah, I'm trying to get it to get as much straight surface as possible, but then of course it's going to have to be smoothed out with the roller a little bit. But this way you'll obtain all kinds of mica shift patterns. I guess I had a tiny piece of something else there. Oh well. Yes, it will have to stay there after all. It will teach me to be careful what all kinds of clay crumbs are on my table. That's coming from working on several things at the same time. And I didn't cut it very well. Oh well. It's going to be fine. Trust me, it's going to be gorgeous. Okay, I went with it through the pasta machine a little bit, just a tad thinner than my sheet of clay was, and then placing some bacon bond on the back, and then I will be placing my concentric hearts backing on it. And of course you can use whatever other color you want if you want, and you don't have to use the same mica shift pattern I used. You can use another texture, or you can just leave the clay as is, because it's a metallic pearlescent, so it will look beautiful once it is all sanded and buffed. Or you can use what I used for the backing, you can use for the front as well. Then of course you'll have to nicely smooth out the edges. And again, don't forget, don't spend an enormous amount of time on that, because that can be fixed very easily when you sand. You will get a beautiful, perfect edge. But still, you want to obtain that kind of beveled edge, so I'm using the roller at a 45 degrees angle. And then of course I'll be using some alcohol to smooth out all that, because it makes sanding so much easier. After which, of course, again, baking, sanding and buffing. But I'm going to use this Sugarcraft. I'm not very happy about Sugarcraft molds because they are a little bit too soft for polymer clay. Anyway, the same, get your mix until you get a beautiful mica sheen, and then just get molds of those feathers. I liked this mold especially for what I wanted to do, because it has two larger feathers and two medium feathers, and they are kind of symmetrical, even if not completely identical symmetrical, but it will still help me do those wings. I know that wings have more than two feathers each, but here I'm going with the representation. Not everything has to be perfectly realistic in order for it to be art, or in order for it to be beautiful. You can make the human mind perceives, if it will see even one feather in a position like a wing, it will process it as a wing. The same as if it would see a pattern of, let's say, leopard print, it will automatically see the whole animal. So here we are using a representation of the whole thing by one of its elements, the representation of the whole wing by a feather. Of course, I could have made wings made fully out of feathers. I do have tiny feather molds. But remember, this is supposed to make even beginners be able to make beautiful things. So this being on a beginner intermediate level, I'm just trying to show you how to make very pretty Valentine's Day hearts without needing to have a lot of experience with polymer clay. So while I was talking here, I've shown you how I do my molds. And you can see I did two of the large ones, two of the medium ones. For the dove, I'm going to use a trick here because I don't have a mold of a dove. So I'm going to use the Wild Flights of Best Flexible Molds, and I'm going to use a hummingbird mold that I'm going to transform a little bit. And it's not hard. All it is to just change the proportions of the head to the body and of the body in general, and of course cut down on the beak a lot and extend the wings a little bit, and it will present to the eye and to the brain the image of a dove. So the trick These molds are very, very small, so you might find it a little bit difficult to take stuff out of, but just keep, bending them like that until one of the sides comes off, and you'll be able to use it perfectly. Now, see, I already cut a little bit the beak, and now I'm going to put it aside. Look at this. This is how I usually sand and buff. Everybody asks me, how do you do it? I first do a trial, and only when it's buffed I can see where I had mistakes and where I had to go back and sand it, and you can see the difference. This is why it looks so good. Yeah, you might say it's double the work. No, it's not, because I don't do it very hard, just to give me the idea. So you see, I have placed some bacon bond on the top sides of the heart, and now I will be placing my feathers that will create the wings. Gently bend the polymer to get the shape that you want. I showed you in other tutorials how you can easily bend a straight sheet of polymer to get in a curved position. And you can do the same with something that's been in a mold. Just be careful and don't press on top of it. Just gently pull on the sides if you want to make it in a curved shape. And yes, I will be using a little bit of a sculpting tool, because on the smaller feathers I didn't think that the lines of the feather itself were very defined, but this is just fine. I mean, you can use a little bit of a sculpting tool to define your feathers better. To attach the smaller feather on top, of course, you won't be needing the bacon bond because it's raw clay on raw clay. Now you saw I didn't worry too much about the edges while I was placing my feathers, but once I have my feathers placed, that is when I will be taking care of the edges, because obviously you are not going to leave the pendant as is. The back looks horrible on the edges where those feathers are. So number one, I'm going to gently fold a little bit the excess of the feather that comes over the top of the base heart, and then I'm going to be using my X-Acto knife to gently extend the lines of the feather itself. And then I will be cutting in a straight line whatever comes up that's all a little bit over, because I'm going to cover those edges on the back with more of the silver and pearl mix. So you want that to be fairly flat, because otherwise you'll have some problems trying to make everything nice and even. Now let's work on the dove. Of course, place some Bacon Bond on the back. Try not to smear too much Bacon Bond on the face, because it's going to be really hard to remove if you don't see it before it bakes. Now let's transform completely this hummingbird into a dove. So you see, I'm going to thin out the head, because the proportion of the hummingbird's head to the body is way bigger than the one of the dove. And then I'm going to enlarge a little bit the tail as well as the wings, and get the beak even a little bit shorter than it is. Now there, if you want, you can add a tiny rhinestone instead of an eye for the dove, but I decided to no. Or you can put a rhinestone or a flower or whatever else instead of a dove, or just leave the pendant as is, just with the feathers there. It's completely up to you. Now let's create the two bands that will go on the edges on the back where the feathers are. And I just stacked up some of the white pearl and silver, and I cut two strips, and then I will make a string, because there's a little bit of a dip between the base heart and the feathers themselves that has to be perfectly covered in order to obtain a nice and even and professional looking edge on the back for those feathers. So just fill in everything that's between the edge of the base heart and the feathers. You'll have to pay special attention to that crease that's on top of the heart. And you know that I use the cane benders a lot as rollers, but you can use simply just the handle of the paintbrush. And once you get everything smooth enough, just simply cut out the excess clay following the line of the base heart. And I swear, sometimes I spend more time on finishing the edges and the backs than I spend on the front. But, you know, that's the mark of the true artist or crafter, paying the same attention to details, to the finishing, and to the parts that aren't seen. Now I'm going to thin down those 2 slices I cut from the stack and then apply them on top of that filling area I had. And this is the part where I have to do a lot of detail finishing, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to extend a little bit the lines on the feathers towards the edge on the back, but I don't want them to be too brutal, you know. I don't want to have very, very strong, deep lines. And you will see I'm using the X-Acto knife to extend the feather lines, but then I will puff a little bit of alcohol on top of that and smooth it out just a little bit so it will look the same as the lines on the mold. I know this must look like a lot of work, but I told you, I'm really fussy when it comes to this. And why I have to be very careful, because as much as it is true that all that rounded area, beveled area, I can fix it with the sandpaper when I sand it. But the area where the white and silver meets the back, that has to be very nice and precise if I want to do something really nice. Now, if you have issues and you don't want to have to go through all that, instead of the backing that I have shown you, place the feathers directly on the front and then do whatever texture you want on a plain backing of a mix of the white pearl and silver. And that way you'll have a full, complete, uninterrupted, nice edge, and that should be it. So you won't have to fuss so much about the feathers being continued on the edge and all that. But anyway, you see how I'm doing the lines, and then I very, very gently smooth out a little bit with the alcohol so that the lines wouldn't be too harsh on the clay and they would look nice and the same way as they look on the part that's molded on the front. And that's pretty much it. Now, to be very honest, I initially wanted to antique it or put some metallic wax on it, but I decided in the end against it because I thought it looks classier this way. So all I need to do is to just put an ice screw pin. So I'm making a hole and I'm going to use 2 different drill bits, because remember, if you try to use one that's too large to start with, your clay might crack. And here I'm showing you how to put the ice screw in, but I suggest you first dip the screw part in some Loctite or super glue or something, and then screw it in, because if you leave it like this it will fall off after a while. But there we go. That's the pretty angel wings heart for Valentine's. Happy claying!